Hey, my name is Cole Briggs. I'm 31 years old, and I run a small glass production studio out of a rented industrial space on the east end of Flagstaff, Arizona. What I make, practically, is functional glass. Tumblers, pitchers, bowls, small vessels for restaurants and kitchen retailers, and the occasional homeware shop that wants something with the particular quality that handmade glass has over manufactured glass. Which is harder to describe than to see, but which comes down to this: no two pieces are identical. Each one carries in its form the specific decisions made in the 30 seconds between gather and set. And that variability is not a defect, but the thing people are paying for. I also do custom commission work, commemorative pieces, architectural glass, the occasional art installation, which is less reliable as income and more interesting as work, and which I balance against the production line, the way a person balances the thing that pays the bills against the thing that makes the bills worth paying. I came to glass blowing sideways. I was a welder in my early 20s, good enough at it that I could have made a career in fabrication, and I took a glass-blowing class at a community arts center in Tempe on the suggestion of a girlfriend who thought I needed a hobby that didn't involve sparks. The girlfriend did not last. The glass did. There is something in the work that uses the same part of my brain that welding uses: the understanding of heat, the respect for material, the knowledge that the thing you are making has its own logic, and you are not imposing a shape on it so much as collaborating with what it wants to become, and I have never found another medium that had that quality. I have run the studio for 5 years. Before that, I worked as an apprentice under a production glassblower in Tucson for 3 years, which is where I learned the difference between someone who can blow glass and someone who can blow glass reliably, which is the difference between a craft and a business. The studio employs me and one part-time assistant named Toms, who has been with me for 2 years and who is better at the production work than I was at his stage, which I consider the correct outcome of teaching. I wake up at 6. The studio runs hot. The furnace is at 2200 degrees when we're in production, so the early morning is the best time to work before the Arizona heat adds its own pressure. I am at the studio by 7. I work until 3 or 4, depending on what is on the production schedule. I drive home to the house I rent on Ponderosa Street, which has a backyard with a mesquite tree and a porch I built myself that faces west, and I cook dinner and sit on the porch in the evening when the light comes down through the Ponderosa pines and the air goes cooler, and I read. Or I think about whatever piece I have been working on, or I just sit there, which I have found is its own productive activity. I do not have a large social life, and I have made my peace with that. The work takes the same kind of attention that I would otherwise spend on other things, and I have found, over the years, that I am not someone who can be fully present at the bench and fully present everywhere else. Something gets less than it deserves. I choose the bench. I believe this is honest rather than a failure. There was someone, for almost 2 years, who understood that about me and worked around it, or tried to. Her name was Phoebe. She left for Seattle 14 months ago for a job that was genuinely better than the one she had, and I helped her pack the truck, and I drove the first hour of the highway with her until I had to turn back, and we said goodbye at a rest stop outside of Williams on a Tuesday morning in October, and it was one of the harder mornings I have had in recent memory. We text sometimes. She is well. What I carry from that is not grief exactly, but a kind of understanding of my own limits that I did not have before. The specific knowledge of what I had not been able to offer someone who deserved more of me than I gave. I tell you this because it is the context for what I did and did not say to a woman named Nora Valdez over the course of the 14 months between Phoebe's departure and the night Nora sat across from me at a fire ring on the edge of Walnut Canyon and told me she had slept with. My jacket every night for a year. Nora had come into the studio for the first time about a month after Phoebe left, a Wednesday afternoon in November. Walk in, looking for a set of tumblers for a housewarming gift. She was a structural botanist at Northern Arizona University, which I did not know yet. She was wearing a field shirt with a pen in the breast pocket and dust on her boots. That was the specific red dust of the canyon country south of town, and she looked at the tumblers on the display shelf with the unhurried attention of someone who was not going to be rushed toward a decision. She picked up 3 different ones. She held each one to the window light. She was reading them the way I read my own work, looking at the wall thickness, the evenness of the form, the specific quality of the color where it had layered in the gather. "You're looking at the glass," I said. "I'm a scientist," she said, without putting the tumbler down. "I look at things. What do you see?" I said. She held the one she was holding up to the window a moment longer. "The color variation here," she said, pointing to the base. "That's where the gather was thicker. The color pooled there, and the rest of the wall is clearer. It's not a flaw. It's just where the physics went." I looked at it. She was exactly right. "Structural botanist," she said, setting it down. "I spend most of my time looking at how plants solve structural problems. You see similar things in glass. The material does what the stress requires." I looked at her. "I'll take 2 of those," she said, pointing to the pair whose walls were most consistent. "For the housewarming. But I want to come back and look at the commission work sometime, if that's all right." "Doors open on weekdays," I said. She came back the following Wednesday. And the one after that, she was, I understood over the first several visits, someone whose quality of attention was unusual in the specific way that very good scientists are unusual. She noticed what was actually there rather than what she expected to find. And she applied this to everything in her range, not just specimens. She noticed when the studio temperature was different from the previous visit. She noticed when Tom's had changed his alignment on a particular step of the production process. She noticed, on the 5th visit, that I had adjusted the color formula for the Cobalt series, which produced a slight shift in the gather that was visible in the finished wall. I had not mentioned this to anyone. "The blue is different," she said. "I adjusted the Frit ratio," I said. "You can see that in the finished piece? The color distribution has changed," she said, more even across the wall. The old formula pooled slightly more at the base. I stared at the piece. "How do you know what the old formula did?" I said. "You've seen 6 batches. I remember what things look like," she said. "It's the job." She said this without pride, as a statement of professional fact. I filed it in the category of things I was finding out about Nora Valdez that I was not sure what to do with. By February, she was stopping by once a week, sometimes twice. We talked about the work, mine and hers, which overlapped in the ways that glass and plant physiology overlap when you are both thinking about material behavior under stress. And the conversations had the particular quality of 2 people who have found someone who thinks in a compatible register and are not yet sure what to do about it. I knew what I was doing. I was in the particular state I had been in before with Phoebe, the state of being genuinely present in someone's company, without letting the full weight of that presence become a thing I acknowledged. I had been told once that the reason I was hard to be close to was not that I was unavailable, but that I was available in a specifically limited way, like a room with good furniture and no windows, and that eventually the person in the room ran out of light. I had thought about that. I had not solved it. I let things stay as they were. Nora came to the studio. We talked about glass and stress responses, and the specific architecture of material under load. I did not say the thing I was not saying. The night of the jacket was a Friday in March, 4 months after her first visit. A group of people from the university had organized a fire ring out at Walnut Canyon. 4 or 5 people from Nora's department and some others. The kind of gathering that happens in Arizona's spring when the nights are still cold enough to want a fire and warm enough to sit outside. She had mentioned it to me, and I had said I would come, which I had said in the way I sometimes committed to social things, with genuine intention and the reasonable expectation that the intention would carry. I wore the jacket. It was the jacket I always wore in the evenings in March, a canvas field jacket, dark green, lined, worn enough to be comfortable, the kind of jacket you have had for a long time, and which has become, without ceremony, simply what you wear in that specific weather. I wore it to the fire, and I sat beside Nora most of the evening, and we talked, and the fire did its work, and somewhere around 11 the night had gotten cold in a way that was cold even for the altitude, and Nora was in a light sweater that was not adequate for it. I took off the jacket. I almost did not because I did not want to. I wanted to, which was part of what stopped me briefly. The awareness that handing someone your jacket is not a neutral act, and I had been being careful about neutral acts for 4 months. But she was cold, and I was warm, and the offering was the obvious and decent thing, and I handed it to her before my carefulness caught up with my decency. She looked at it for a second before she put it on. Then she put it on. She said thank you. I said it was nothing. We went back to the conversation. She wore it the rest of the evening. When the fire broke up and people started moving toward their cars, she looked down at the jacket and said, "I'll get this back to you." "No rush," I said. She drove home in my jacket. I drove home in the cold, which was fine. The following Wednesday, she came to the studio, and she was not wearing the jacket, and she did not mention the jacket. And I did not mention it, and this happened again the following week, and the week after that. By April, I understood that she was not going to bring it up, and I was not going to bring it up, and the jacket was somewhere in her apartment on Humphrey Street, and this was the state of things. And I looked at that state, and noted what it told me, and continued not saying anything. I want to be honest about this. I was not passive about the jacket. I was deliberate. I understood that the jacket being at her apartment was a thing, and that neither of us naming it was also a thing, and that both of these things together were telling me something I had been trying to figure out how to hear for 4 months. I did not say anything because I did not yet know how to say it, without either overclaiming what was between us or underclaiming it. And I have always found that the wrong precision is worse than silence. That is the honest version. The less honest version is that I was afraid of being wrong, and afraid of what happened to the Wednesday visits if I named it and named it badly. And I had lost enough warmth in the previous year that I was not ready to risk what warmth remained. So the jacket stayed at her apartment. The weeks became months. The visits continued. I learned her in the way you learn someone when you spend regular time with them in a focused space over a long period. She thought out loud, not in the way that required a response, but in the way that externalized the working through, the specific process of a mind that operated by speaking rather than by writing or by silence. She would arrive at the studio with a problem from the lab and talk it through with me the way she might talk it through with a colleague, not because I was a structural botanist, but because I was a listener who did not rush her toward the conclusion, which she had told me once was harder to find than it should be. The Wednesday visits accumulated. By April, she had been to the studio 12 or 13 times, and there was a specific ease in the visits that had not been there in November. Not the ease of familiarity exactly, but the ease of 2 people who had stopped performing interest and had simply arrived at it. She asked good questions about the glass, not the questions visitors asked, which tended toward the dramatic aspects, the heat, the physical spectacle of the blowing, but questions about the problem solving. Why this gather size for this form? how you anticipated color distribution before the piece set. What happened when the calculation was wrong? What happens when it fails? She said, on a day in March when I was working a form that was not going where I wanted it. You put it in the scrap bin, I said. The glass gets remelted. Nothing is wasted. That's a good system, she said. It took me 3 years to stop being upset about it, I said. The failed pieces. My first year in the studio, I would try to save things that were already past saving. You lose an hour fighting a piece you should have let go. She was quiet, looking at the form on the end of the pipe. How do you know when to let it go? She said. When what you're doing is about your attachment to the plan, I said, rather than what the piece actually needs. She looked at me. The way she looked at things she was filing. That applies to other things, she said. Most things, I said. I put the piece in the scrap bin. It had been past saving for 10 minutes. I took a new gather. She watched me start again without comment. That was the thing about Nora in the studio. She did not fill the space that needed to be empty for the work to happen. She understood when silence was productive and when it was just empty, and she did not confuse them. I had worked alongside very few people who had that quality. My father had it. Phoebe had not, which had been nobody's fault. Nora had it without seeming to have learned it, which told me it was native to her rather than acquired. I found reasons to run the furnace later on Wednesdays. This was not difficult to justify. There was always something that could use the extra time, and I did not examine it very closely. She was not sentimental. She was clear-eyed about the world in the way scientists are clear-eyed, and she applied that clarity to her own life, without softening it for comfort. She had told me. In one of the conversations that happened between production runs in April, about her last relationship, a man in her department who had been her collaborator for 3 years, and her partner for 2 of them, and which had ended when the professional respect outlasted the personal one, and which she described without self-pity and without dramatic language. 2 people who had been right for the work and wrong for the life, and both of them had been slow to understand the distinction. She said, I think I stayed because leaving felt like admitting I had misread the data. I looked at her. And had you? I said. I read the data correctly, she said. I just didn't apply it correctly. I understood this. I had made the same error in a different direction, with Phoebe, where I had known what I was not offering, and had not corrected the deficit until it was too late to correct. Somewhere in July, on a Thursday evening when the studio had run long, and Tom's had gone home, and Nora had stayed, which happened sometimes. The 2 of us at the end of a production day, with the furnace cooling, and the bench cleared. She said, Do you know what I like about watching you work? Tell me, I said. You don't force it, she said. I've watched people blow glass before. Most of them are fighting the material. You listen to it. You work with what the gather wants to do, not against it. And then you're surprised every time it comes out well, which doesn't make sense because you're the one who made it come out that way. I looked at a finished piece cooling on the shelf. The material does half the work, I said. My job is not to ruin what it's already doing. That's not how most people think about making things, she said. It's how plants grow, I said. She was quiet. She had her hands on the workbench, and the studio light was doing the thing it did in the evening, when the furnace was low, amber, warm. The quality of late afternoon even at 7:30 at night, and she looked like a person who was about to say something and deciding whether to. She did not say it. She gathered her bag and said goodnight and left. And I stood in the cooling studio, and I understood exactly what she had not said. And I understood that I had not said anything either, and that the not saying was becoming its own structure, its own weight-bearing element in something that was building without a name. I made a piece that night, after she left. No plan, no template, just a gather and a breath and the movement of hands. It came out as a small bowl, slightly asymmetrical, with a color variation through the wall that I had not intended and could not have replicated. I set it on the shelf to cool. In the morning, it was the best thing on the shelf. I need to tell you about a man named Garrett Skull. Garrett Skull was on the board of a gallery in Flagstaff called Meridian, which had been showing my commission work for 2 years and which represented 4 other makers in the region. He was the board's chair, 55, money from commercial development, the kind of man who collected art as a function of social positioning and had enough aesthetic sense to make reasonably good decisions about what to acquire, but who understood the value of an artist's work primarily in terms of how it reflected on the collector. In August, Meridian offered me a solo show. A solo show at Meridian was the kind of opportunity that changed a studio's trajectory. The gallery had a serious collectors list and a track record of launching regional makers into broader markets. I had been working toward this for 5 years. I said yes. The show was scheduled for November. By September, I was producing work specifically for it. Pieces that were beyond the production line, the kind of work I could only make when I was not also making tumblers for restaurant accounts. I pulled back on the production schedule. I pulled back on everything that was not the show. Garrett Skull came to the studio in October, 6 weeks before the opening, with a woman from the gallery's communications team and a photographer. He looked at what I had made for the show, and he said the right things, which he was capable of saying, and then he said, "The series needs a centerpiece, something people will remember. We're building the marketing around it." I had a piece in progress that I believed was the centerpiece, a large blown vessel, the most technically demanding thing I had attempted, with a color treatment that I had been developing for 4 months. It was not finished. Garrett said he needed to photograph the centerpiece by the end of the following week. I said the piece would be finished when it was finished. He said the marketing timeline required the photography by the end of the week. I said I understood the timeline, and the piece would be ready when it was sound. There was a pause. He said, pleasantly, that he had found with artists that timelines sometimes benefited from a clear commitment, and that he hoped I understood the opportunity the show represented. I said I understood the opportunity. I said that a piece photographed before it was sound would not represent my work or the gallery correctly, and that I would rather discuss extending the timeline than compromise the piece. He left. He called the gallery director the next morning. I know this because the director, a woman named Roz, who had represented me for 2 years and who had the specific patience of someone who dealt regularly with the space between what artists could do and what galleries wanted to sell, called me that afternoon and said Garrett had expressed concern about my timeline flexibility and wanted to know if there was a problem. I told Roz what I had told Garrett. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll handle him. Finish the piece." I called Nora that evening, not to tell her about Garrett specifically, to hear her voice, which I recognized as something I needed in a moment when the work was under a pressure I had not invited. She picked up and asked how the day had been, and I told her about the piece and the timeline, and she listened and then said, "What does the piece need?" "Another 2 weeks," I said. "The color treatment has a second stage. If I skip it, the piece is fine, but it's not what it can be." "Then it needs 2 weeks," she said. "The piece doesn't know about Garrett Skull's marketing calendar." I was quiet for a moment. "No," I said. "It doesn't. Glass doesn't lie about what it is," she said. "You told me that in November, the first time I came to the studio. You said the material does what the stress requires, and the piece shows you what it became. You can't make it become something different by hurrying it. I held the phone. "Nora," I said. "Yes," she said. There was a pause that had weight in it. Not the heavy kind, the kind that is full of something. "I need to say something that I have been not saying since approximately February," I said. She was quiet. "I am going to say it after the show," I said. "Not because I'm not ready to say it, but because I want to say it when the largest thing in my life right now is not a deadline, and because I want to do it right, and because you have been patient with me in a way I have not deserved, and I am going to try to deserve it." She was quiet for a long time. "Okay," she said. Finally, after the show, Ross called me the following morning and said Garrett had backed down on the timeline. She said he had looked at photographs of work in progress and decided the piece was worth the wait. What she did not say, but which I understood, was that she had told him clearly what the cost of pushing would be, and he had made the calculation. I finished the piece in the second week of November, 2 weeks before the opening. The color treatment resolved the way I had known it would, a depth in the wall that you could not achieve with a single stage, a quality of light moving through the glass that was different from anything I had made before. I set it on the cooling shelf, and I looked at it for a long time. Toms came in from the loading area and looked at it. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "That's the one." He went back to packing the production order. He did not elaborate because he did not need to. I called Nora that evening, not because I needed to tell her the piece was finished, she would see it at the show, but because I had been carrying something since our conversation the week before that I needed to say a partial version of. "I told you after the show," I said, "but I want to tell you one thing now." "Okay," she said. "The reason I'm making this work," I said, "is partly the show, and partly the 5 years of building toward this, and partly because you told me in November of last year that the material does what the stress requires. And I have thought about that sentence at the bench every week since you said it. And I wanted you to know that before the opening." She was quiet for a long moment. "Cole," she said. "Yes," I said. "After the show," she said. "After the show," I said. The show opened on a Friday in November, a year and 8 months after Nora had first walked into the studio. The piece was finished. The color treatment had resolved the way I had known it would, and the centerpiece was the centerpiece, and Roz had handled Garrett's skull, and the opening was full, and the work was on the walls and the shelves, and I stood in the gallery in Flagstaff and felt the particular feeling that finished work produces when it is exactly what you meant. Garrett's skull looked at the centerpiece for a long time. He said, "You were right to wait." I said, "Thank you." He said it was the best thing in the room, which it was, and moved on. Nora was at the opening. She stood in front of the small asymmetrical bowl I had made the evening she had left the studio, without saying the thing she had almost said, which I had included in the show not because it was technically exceptional, but because it was the truest piece in the series, and she stood in front of it for a long time. I came and stood beside her. "This one," she said. "Yes," I said. "When did you make it?" she said. "July," I said. "A Thursday evening, after you left." She was quiet. "I know when I left that Thursday," she said. "I know what I didn't say." "I know too," I said. The gallery was loud around us with the specific noise of an opening, voices and glass and the sound of things being decided. We were standing in front of a small bowl that had come out of an evening I had not planned to make anything in, and the bowl was there because the material had done what the stress required, and the stress had been Nora leaving without saying the thing, and I had not ruined what the material was already doing. After the opening, after the guests had cleared and Roz had closed the gallery, and Toms had gotten a ride home with one of the production clients, Nora and I drove out to Walnut Canyon and sat at the same fire ring where I had given her the jacket. And she had a jacket on. Not mine. Her own. And the fact of her own jacket was something I noticed and set aside for later. We sat at the dead fire in the November cold, which was the same kind of cold as the year before. The high-altitude cold that is different from lowland cold because it is clear and dry and you can see every star in the sky without any softening from the air. She said, "I kept it." I looked at her. "The jacket," she said. "I kept it. I always meant to return it, and then I didn't, and then enough time passed that returning it would have been a thing rather than just giving it back, and I—" She stopped. She looked at the canyon in the dark. "I slept with it every night. The stars were very bright. The Mesquite and the Ponderosa were black shapes against the sky. The canyon below us was invisible, just presence and depth. For a year," I said. "For a year," she said. I did not say anything for a moment. I sat with it the way I sit with a gather before I begin to work it, feeling the heat, understanding what is there. "I gave you the jacket," I said, "because I did not know how to give you what I actually wanted to give you. I was not ready to be that direct. So I gave you the jacket, and I told myself it was just being decent, and I have known for a year that it was not just that." She looked at me, the direct eyes in the starlight. "You told me after the show," she said. "You kept your word." "I try to," I said. She put her hand in mine. I held it. Above us, the canyon's rim was a clean dark line against the Milky Way, and the cold was the cold that makes you aware of being alive in it, and we sat there for a long time without needing to say anything more. I kissed her eventually, in the way you finally do a thing that has been waiting, not urgently, not dramatically, but with the full weight of everything that had taken its time to arrive. She put her hand flat on my chest and leaned back and looked at me. "You are going to be impossible to stay close to," she said. "Aren't you?" "I have been told that," I said. "I know," she said. "I've been watching you be it for 14 months. And you're still here," I said. "I slept with your jacket for a year," she said. "I am familiar with patience." 14 months after Nora Valdez walked into the studio looking for tumblers. She has the key to the house on Ponderosa Street. She is at the house 3 or 4 evenings a week, which has become the shape of things, not because we decided it, but because it found its level, the way glass finds its level when you stop fighting it. She brings field notebooks and a change of clothes and the specific domestic precision of someone who knows how to inhabit a space without overriding it. The jacket is back. It lives on the hook by the back door now, beside her field jacket with the pen still in the breast pocket. The first morning she brought it back, she hung it there without saying anything, and I looked at the 2 jackets on the hook and did not say anything either, and that was all it needed. The small asymmetrical bowl from July is on the kitchen shelf, which she chose as its location without asking, because she has the quality of putting things where they belong without needing permission to do so. I have not moved it. The centerpiece from the show sold at the opening. Garrett Skull bought it, which I have thought about since, and which I have decided to find less ironic than it could be. Because a man who understands the value of something after the fact is better than a man who never understands it. Ross told me in January that 3 galleries had contacted Meridian about the show. 2 of them are serious inquiries. I told Ross I needed to think about the production implications before I committed to anything. Ross said she knew, and that she would wait, and that she had been waiting on artists for 20 years, and I was not the most patient case she had managed. Toms has been with the studio for 2.5 years now, and he is, without question, better at production consistency than I am. I have told him this. He pretended not to hear me, and went back to the bench, which is the correct response. There is a woman named Sol who runs the plant nursery 3 blocks from the studio, and who has known Nora for several years, the way people know each other in a small city where a specific community forms around a specific kind of work. Sol stopped me on the street in December, the first time we had met in person, though I had heard Nora mention her, and said, "You're the glassblower." I said yes. She looked at me with a direct assessment of someone who has spent years reading whether plants are going to make it. Then she said, "Good. She's been careful for too long." She went back into the nursery. I have thought about that sentence. She's been careful for too long. It is also true of me, and Sol did not know that, and I wonder if she would have said it the same way if she had. I think about the gather sometimes. About the 30 seconds between the moment you take the molten glass from the furnace and the moment it sets, the window in which everything that the piece will become is determined. You cannot force it. You cannot rush it. You can only work with what is there, in the direction it is already going, and trust that the breath you put into it is finding the right shape. Nora said once that the material does what the stress requires, and the piece shows you what it became. She was describing my glass. She was also, I understood later, describing the 14 months. The stress required patience. It required showing up at the studio on Wednesdays and talking about material behavior without naming the material behavior that was most present in the room. It required a jacket left on a hook in an apartment on Humphrey Street for a year, and 2 people who understood what the jacket meant and were waiting for the right temperature to say so. A piece breathed into is structurally different from one that hasn't been. The breath is inside it. You cannot see it. But it is present in every wall of the vessel, and the vessel would not be the shape it is without it. I breathed into this. So did she. I am glad neither of us rushed it.